Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Center for Architecture and Metropolitan Planning. My name is Jiří Jaroš and I will be the host of this event. So my name is not Stepan Bertel and I'm not the director of camp, but I have his notes. And I agree with his introduction because he mentioned that this event, Meanwhile City, how to create welcoming places, is important for camp. We are really happy that we host this event because these temporary interventions and meanwhile projects are really motivating for us. Two reasons. First is that when you create a project like this, some temporary change in a city, it gets you closer to people. You see how they use spaces, how they use public places, and how they enjoy a city. And the second reason is that timelines of our projects are usually longer than 5 years. It's very demotivating to waiting for the result. But when you have a project that changes the place within months, weeks, or hours, it's very motivating. It charges you, and you have an energy for another project and another changes in the city, another development, and that's really interesting for us. Today we have a discussion about those temporary changes that will be followed by the launch of the book Meanwhile City. I would like to tell you that you have a chance to ask us questions. There will be a discussion after presentations. You have a chance to raise your hand. We will give you a mic and you can ask a question, or you can use slido.com. You can use a hashtag Meanwhile City. You will write it in Slido, and I will see your questions in my tablet, and that's all. So, first I would like to give the floor to Martin Jenča, founder and design director of Milk Studio, who has an experience with impressive temporary intervention, Stará tržnice in Bratislava. So, please, Martin.
Thank you. So I will be really quick because I'm always stressed to speak aloud before anybody. So as was mentioned, I'm a leading communication studio, Milk, and we are like collective of designers, visual artists, and storytellers, and communication planners. We are helping real estate companies and city officials to tell stories and create identities for their public and private places. So, and then you can say that we just do the marketing, but that's not the true. Or we do just brand for a place. But we're trying to help, or we help build a welcoming place first, and the brand and communication will follow. So no marketing campaign can make a place great. So the role of marketing is like communicate about a great place. So let's see it like this. And so as a communication agency, we created a multidisciplinary team that helps our clients create welcoming places first. Then we have an interesting story to tell. And the team is led by architect and urbanist Petra Markov, who will be speak after me. So a few years ago, it was pretty normal that the real estate project was created without a proper public space. So today it is unthinkable, and for me it is like definitely unthinkable. So I believe in the near future will be unthinkable to have a real estate or city projects without the meanwhile uses. So with this event and the book, we want to inspire you to let designers, writers, and artists, I mean us, help you to make space for great stories. So, welcome.
Thank you. And as Martin mentioned, next speaker and guest is Petra Marko, placemaking director at Milk. Petra is an architect and urban strategist with over 15 years experience across placemaking, housing development, and design advocacy in London. Petra leads a team that builds identities for cities, districts, and places. And she is the main author behind the Meanwhile City book.
Thank you for the introduction, Jirka, and it's great to be here tonight. As Jirka mentioned, I'm an architect who actually worked a great deal on public space projects for the last 15 years and on housing projects which engage with the public realm. And in these projects, you always have to communicate as an architect with a number of people, different stakeholders. So communication is incredibly important and crucial in this process. So when Martin approached me to build a dedicated places team to talk about place narrative and place vision at the very start of these projects, where we had in the past collaborated together, my studio and Milk, on large master planning projects where there's nothing actually in the physical space yet, and you have to actually come up with a strategy how you're going to start that communication process. We discovered that we were really on the same page about communication. In order to tell great stories, we have to shape great places. And great places are those where the experience is authentic, places that are authentic and where people actually come together and have experiences. So I'd like to start this talk with a story about the old market hall in Bratislava, which back in 2012 had been abandoned and empty and unused for quite a few years because the city didn't have enough funds for its upkeep and resources to actually program it. And a group of friends, including Martin and including Matúš Val, who is currently the mayor of Bratislava, so a group of activists, but actually a group of people who are pretty good at what they do in their different respective fields, came together to revive and bring this market hall back to life. And instead of just talking about the future and how it will be when it's all nice and renovated, they started immediately doing things. So they started with a monthly pop-up market, which had then later expanded into a weekly market and a series of other events. They were able to make the case to the city to get a long lease from the city for very little money, and then they were also able to raise funds for the renovation works. And it has expanded to this hub with lots of communal activities, with lots of installations, free art installations that were happening over the last couple of summers, cultural events, book fairs. There's lots of activities for children. There's lots of environmental activities for people to learn about food and the planet. And what is most amazing is that at the end of the day, what started as a series of temporary interventions had reactivated a whole quarter of the city. So the street frontages around the market hall, the whole plaza in front of it, and it had spurred on the city to put out to call an international competition to revitalize a series of squares that link up to the old market hall. So when we think about cities, they are actually constantly evolving and constantly changing and reacting to different moments of crisis. And one such moment was back in 2008, a financial crisis, where particularly in big cities with lots of global financial pressures like London or New York, there were many empty city plots which were undeveloped or were stalled or were waiting for development to happen. Because the funds had stopped at that very moment. And instead of just having these empty sites boarded up with fences, they actually, many of these sites or buildings became reactivated either through bottom-up initiatives or through urban practitioners. One such example is on Union Street in South London, where there was a series of events curated by the Architecture Foundation, including a Lido, which had engaged a lot of people from the local community and from the local market traders, Borough Market, which is very nearby. And when we talk about reactivating assets, This is a great example, again from South London, where a 7-story parking garage building, which had been abandoned and unused, was first activated on the roof as a pop-up bar with lots of events and art installations, and then actually Carl will, I'm sure, will talk about later on. There's been actually a project of his where 50 studios and 70 co-working spaces were put inside of this building with a series of other social spaces and events. When we talk about different pressures and crises, it is also about changing retail trends. We no longer go to high streets or to town centers to shop, per se. We go to places to meet with people and to exchange experiences. My favorite Columbia Road Flower Market is one such place. And street markets are by default temporary and pop-up in their nature, and they are actually incredibly powerful in bringing people together in a space and creating that buzz and that hub of exchange. Probably most of you know about these projects, and I'm going back to the point where Martin told me to stand. Probably a lot of you know about projects which are about increasing cycling and walking in cities, which is incredibly important, and moving away from cars. One of the most famous ones is pedestrianization of Times Square in New York, which actually had started as a temporary trial using 374 beach chairs. And actually by mapping the effect on surrounding streets, it was established that actually the traffic wasn't clogged up more, actually it was flowing better, and people were flocking to the place and sitting down and eating hot dogs or doing whatever they are doing in New York. And 70 squares were pedestrianized, or 70 junctions were pedestrianized. A series of cycle paths had been laid out. So it could be a really powerful tool, but also in these sort of micro examples where you have the school streets initiatives, or during COVID, there were so many pop-up cycle lanes in London. They had built 100 kilometers pop-up temporary cycle paths during the pandemic, which is twice the speed as previously. So there was really this momentum, and which brings me on to the issue of air quality and well-being and health in cities, which is incredibly important. Cities are still getting denser and denser. There's still projections and forecasts that urbanization will continue. There's going to be more people living in cities, and we are finding ourselves in climate emergency. So we need to come up with strategies how to make cities more livable and how cities can actually work as interconnected organisms. And some of these initiatives have done that brilliantly. In Vienna, there's a program called Grätzeloase, which actually provides financial support and organizational support to residents who want to make their own projects in public spaces. And by default, if they are initiating the projects and getting support from the city, they also are the ones who take care of the space and create opportunities. They have one initiative which is particularly focusing on children and young people. Nick will, I'm sure, talk a lot more about Skip Garden, which is one of the meanwhile projects at King's Cross Quarter in London. And in Barcelona, there's the Barcelona Superblocks initiative, which many of you perhaps know about. Again, spurred on through temporary trials using paint, street furniture, incredibly low cost to start to do if you consider it in the scope of the budget of a city for public space. And the effect is really large scale, it's strategic, and it's long term. Here you can see how Barcelona Superblocks is going to interconnect the green grid of the city and improve the microclimate in a city which is getting hotter and hotter every year, as all cities are these days. And I talked about city initiatives and I talked about bottom-up initiatives, but meanwhile projects and temporary interventions are an incredibly powerful tool when they are not considered as a marketing tool. We heard that already in Martin's introduction. And they've been incredibly well used on large-scale regeneration and master planning projects. Nick will talk about King's Cross, but here's an example of a pond, of a swimming pond, which was there for a year, as you can see, during the construction. So you're drawing people to the space and you're creating a reason for people to come here and to put it on the map. Sire Street in Elephant Park, South London, is a street temporary street frontage which was created during the construction works. So you can see to the right of the street, there's construction works, there's nothing yet, but actually there is a street and there is an active street that you can come to and meet with friends. Gothenburg sauna, this has kickstarted the regeneration of Frihamnen Harbor in Gothenburg, which is led by the city, and it's a free sauna where people can come and have this experience. It has just become sort of the first step of a large regeneration project. And here you've got Aspenseestadt in Vienna, on the outskirts of Vienna, a new city quarter for 25,000 people. So you're talking about creating an identity for a place which actually there is not very much there yet, and you're actually starting using a series of activation tools, including temporary projects. Meanwhile, projects are also incredibly powerful when you consider specific users. So you can't be all things to all people, but you can actually think about particular groups of people that sometimes don't have the space in the city. So this is a lovely initiative. The basketball courts by sports brands Pigalle and Nike. They've been doing these basketball courts around the world, and the one in Beijing is particularly focused on young female athletes for them to encourage them to the sport and for them to feel safe in public space. You've got a great example here in Prague, V7 Underground. Many of you know that project. A lovely example from České Budějovice, where it's a small Czech town which the Baroque fountain in the historic town center had been sort of uncovered or rediscovered through this intervention, visited by 36,000 people in the course of 3 weeks. So this is about actually reviving a historic town center. And there's a series of other initiatives where you could, if you use really simple construction materials, like here with the Folly for a Flyover by Assemble, in London, you can actually, they had 200 volunteers who took part in creating that project. So it's also about making it accessible and engaging people in the process of making it, and through that, creating that sense of ownership and that sense of relationship to the space, that welcoming space for everyone to be in. So, and all of these things are really talking about the place, or placemaking, and placemaking really coming back to 1960s New York, where the famous urbanist and activist Jane Jacobs said there is no logic that can be superimposed on the city. People make it, and it is to them, not buildings. We must fit our plans. And I think this is an incredibly powerful statement, and also the notion about the street being for everyone, and for the streets to be for everyone, they need to be safe, they need to be welcoming, and they need to be active. So this is really an obsession of ours. Both Martin and I really love places from this, and have experience in different aspects how to make those places work. And that's why we put together a team of editors, researchers, designers at Milk to present and to compile and put together this guide for you. It is for city authorities, it is for developers, it is for investors, it is for entrepreneurs, it is for architects and urbanists, and it is also for citizens and communities. You can find detailed case studies here. You can find 10 key steps, how to actually make these things happen. What are the really sort of like pitfalls or the problems that you might encounter by when you embark on meanwhile projects. We have expert interviews from the point of view of a developer, from the point of view of a city official, and from the point of view of an architect, who actually talk about what are the benefits from all these different perspectives, and how to make a win-win meanwhile project, and the different themes which I already mentioned in my presentation. And we really look forward to introduce the book to you tonight, and later on you'll be able to see it and speak to us. And I'm going to do a little thank you to the whole team at the end after the panel discussion, and give the word over to Nick to talk about his developer perspective on King's Cross now. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you very much. As you mentioned, the next speaker is Nick Serrell, joint managing partner at Argent. Nick Serrell spent almost 10 years working on King's Cross, 27 hectares master plan on a former railway in London, which is now home to Central St. Martin's College, offices, retail, and 1,700 new homes. He leads related Argent's Brent Cross town development in North London. So please, Nick, stage is yours.
We could have a lot of fun making the lights chase us up and down here, couldn't we? But I won't, I promise. So yeah, King's Cross. This is 2007, but we actually got involved here in the year 2000. So I think one of the really important bits of context for what I'm going to show you is that we've been involved for 22 years as developers, and we're going to continue to be involved. And it's that longevity that actually gives purpose and rationale to some of the reasons why you do these things. So King's Cross, in the terms that I'm talking, it's a railway station. It's on the northern edge of central London. And behind the railway station, St Pancras and King's Cross, just behind me. And there's a big teardrop-shaped piece of land there, which was an old Victorian goods yard. It's about 67 acres. I can't remember what that was in hectares, 28 hectares. And it was in disuse. It had become run down. It was dangerous. It was known for drugs and prostitution. And we got hold of that in the year 2000, working in partnership with the current landowners. And by 2007, we had a planning permission for 8 million square feet of development, which would bring, about 1,700 homes, probably another 1,000 student homes, and workspace for about 25,000 people. The trouble is that takes a long time to build. And you can't depend upon just opening the odd shop in 4 years' time or the odd restaurant to try and change the perceptions of a place that has a very negative perception. So it was really important that we started very early in the process to start to change how people thought about this place. So we had to think about the objectives. What were we trying to achieve? And the first thing, as I say, was the fact that we were long-term players. The first thing we had to do was shift perceptions. We had to get people to think about this place differently. Firstly, it's not just a railway station. But secondly, we had to get people to think about it in terms of a place that they might actually want to go. We needed to provide great experiences and reasons for people to come. And the third really, really important thing was we had to start creating partnerships and facilitating networks, not just with us, but across others, so that magic would start to happen. That is always where we find things occur. Many developers like to take control of these things. What we've learned over the years is that we are actually best as facilitators and promoters. Generally, the partners that we work with know better about what they're doing than we know about what they're doing. So what we're doing is we're creating the space and the opportunity for them to do that thing well. Ultimately, what we were trying to do here was to create a place, quite simply, where people wanted to come. And if I just go back one of the real challenges with that is that those two stations there have been there for 160 years. And for 160 years, people have been coming out of those two stations and heading south into central London. So we were asking them to turn around and go north to a place where there was nothing other than what we were going to create. There's also railway lines and roads, barriers there, so it was actually quite isolated as a place. So we didn't just have to create places that people could accidentally bump into. We had to give them active reasons to make the choice to make that journey and come there so that we could start to fulfill the objectives that we set ourselves. So what do you do? What are the things that you can do here? The first, listing down, I won't read them all out there, but there's a number of different things that you can start to introduce. And all of them and more were part of what we were trying to achieve. The how actually is more interesting there, and I've put meanwhile uses at the top, but actually all of those, to varying degrees, are a form of meanwhile use. They are temporary interventions that you can bring forward in different ways, whether they be on a daily or longer basis. It's really important that they're not too controlled. It's got to feel quite natural. The other thing that we quickly learned was that we had almost like a laboratory here. We had the opportunity to explore, to learn, to grow, and particularly to fail. And that was really important. Failures in the early years were really important about what we learnt about the place. For example, quite early in the process, we held a giant ice cream fair, which was fantastic, and thousands of people came. In fact, so many thousands of people came that we ran out of ice cream in 2 hours. And when you've got several thousand young children turned up to an ice cream festival and you haven't got any ice cream, doesn't do your reputation a lot of good. So you kind of learn what you can and can't do, and you learn the fact that you probably have to over-provide sometimes. So that was the what. Now, we've had 14 years since 2008, and we've been doing things pretty much every day. We've got over 250,000 photographs of all the things that we've been doing. So in the relatively short time we've got, I've tried to break this down into 4 time zones to kind of say this is what we were doing in each of those phases. So this is the first bit, 2008 through to 2011. 2008 was when we first started building. So the site was essentially derelict. We're walking in and we're just starting to do some construction work. And the kind of things that we were doing at this point is, quite literally, we had an artist in residence who we asked to go out and find materials on the site and use them to create art. And actually, much of that wasn't even seen by the public. That was almost about us creating a culture of artistic endeavour about the place. It was creating a culture, if you like, for this place. And of course, we were bringing around prospective tenants and partners and all the rest. So they did see that. But that was really great, and we just started to build a narrative around what we were doing. We also used some of the existing buildings to install large-scale artworks. This was called Scattered Cloud. Always highly interactive. It was always about not people just coming and having a look. It was about people coming and actually get engaged in that process. We worked with Sadler's Wells. So this was before buildings had really started at all, and Sadler's Wells put on what was supposed to be a 2-night show. It ended up being there for a week because so many people wanted to come. And it was because it was so unusual. You know, in the middle of this industrial landscape, to come in and see, you know, professional dance put on. It was actually just in 6 containers that were put one on top of another, and everybody had headphones and they could hear the music through their headphones. So it was an incredibly successful process. Petra mentioned the skip garden, and it was right at the beginning in 2008 that we actually started the skip garden. The skip garden at that time was about, you know, this big. It was just a few skips, the big buckets from the builders. And it was Global Generation, who are a charity all about young people in urban situations, getting them to understand about food production and how that fits into a health and well-being agenda. We also had, this is a picture of the German gymnasium, which is actually a recent picture of it. It wasn't quite as pretty as that in 2008, 2009, but we were using it as our marketing suite, so we were bringing people in through that. But we were also using it as a cultural venue to put on shows. And really importantly, up at the far end there, we were using it to tell stories, because this place had so many stories to tell from its history. And telling those stories made us so much more engaging than we were if we were just telling people about what was going to come. So part of a meanwhile engagement was, for instance, this young man was in the British fencing team, fencing at the London Olympics. again, the important thing about the school, this is a primary school, wasn't so much about the school itself, it was actually having children in the place. The sound of children, the sight of children completely changes the nature of a place. So that was important. The viewing platform was important because it actually gave people visual access into the site. They could see down into what we were doing. We were doing a lot of work in the ground. We were doing a lot of decontamination work. There were some really interesting things to see, which you obviously couldn't see at ground level. So it was really engaging. And the whole health and well-being agenda was really important. We were starting to bring those things forward. Partnerships with Nike. We built this as a temporary multi-use games area because we had a permanent one that we had to deliver in the permanent solution. But we built one early and started to engage that process 4 or 5 years before the permanent one actually arrived. And this is critical. This is probably the most important decision we made. Okay, if you want to create an accessible place where people can actually come and enjoy and bring their children and bring their grandparents and actually stay for lengthy periods, put really good public toilets in that place, because otherwise it doesn't work. We started with things like this. I put this one here. I showed you the Roman the Roman event earlier, but that is a public toilet block which sat on the corner of Granary Square. You can see these buildings are all still derelict for about 4 years. And it was that made this possible. So actually that temporary intervention in providing what's just necessary for a decent existence in a city was absolutely critical. And then we move into 2015 to 2017, emergence of a new piece of city. Actually now we started to get much more of the permanent restaurants starting to open. We'll move on. You can see how the place is starting to evolve. The skip garden now had its third iteration, and it was even more sophisticated. All of these pictures are of that skip garden, an even bigger cafe and restaurant. I'm really delighted to say it's now actually moved from there again, and it's now in a permanent location on our site where it will be able to stay, and the charity will be able to continue to deliver what it's been doing for the last 14 years, indefinitely into the future. So that is an example of how a very small initial intervention has grown into something through partnership to be very, very sophisticated and very, very meaningful to an awful lot of people. The pond was mentioned earlier. This is public art. This was paid for, cost nearly £2 million. It was paid for through a public arts budget, which we had to expend. And it was, as Petra said, it was all about bringing people into a place to do something that you would never expect to do within the context of a construction site. And how does that relationship work? It's also something to be wary of, because when we took this had a temporary planning permission. When we took it away, we had petitions. We had people marching to our office to say we were an absolute disgrace that we were going to take it away. And we had to make the point that it was A, temporary, and B, when we took it away, it was going to be a park for everybody. Because for all that this was great, it's actually a very, very small group of people who actually want to swim in cold water in the middle of a construction site. So it did have to go, but that was the right answer. And we continued to evolve quite sophisticated events. This is Design Junction, which became a huge event for many years at King's Cross and brought the design community up there and started to really embed what was there from the university, and they were continuing to put on their events, but actually broadened that out beyond just what they did. And it was in this period that we put on our biggest events. And what happens is you kind of build to very big events, and then you actually drop. And I'll show you what and why. So Lumiere London, for learning again, Lumiere London attracted 200,000 people in 4 days. We had 80,000 people on one night. We had to call the police. We had to close all the roads. It was frankly a bit scary, But we, again, learned a huge lesson about what could happen, and we've adapted all of our systems and things. So we've learned incredibly from there. That was the moment Andy Murray won Wimbledon. I just put that there because I like it. This was fantastic. This was a night where these guys here turned up. There was only about 20 of them, but about 500 people joined them in a flash dance, a thriller flash dance, which was, again, participation. And we've had qubit sessions, which have now become a permanent feature of what we do. Other events that we have here, if you want to bruise your backside, go roller skating. That's really, really good. But again, focus on young people. And the markets were really important because the markets were the precursor to the shops. And so you're starting to create a narrative around retailing, which didn't exist at King's Cross before we were doing this. And finally, we're now in the stage where we're through to the present, and it's now becoming quite a mature place. It's not finished yet; it won't finish for another 2 or 3 years. But what we're finding now, what we've got now, is the fact that the things that we've been doing temporarily are landing as permanent. So the retailing is now permanent with fashion. What we've had as temporary cinema is now a permanent cinema. Music is now moving into permanent locations. And that multi-use games area is now a permanent multi-use games area. Cold Drops Yard opened. I could do a whole 20 minutes just on Cold Drops Yard and the things we've done wrong, the things we've done right, what's gone well and what hasn't. But it's been an extraordinary learning process. We still put a lot of meanwhile events on inside here. And also in itself, these guys here, Long Boys, they started in a little gazebo like this. They then went into a little unit like that. And in a month's time, they'll have their own proper shop. So that incubation of businesses through temporary events is really, really important. And we have different kinds of events now. So these are all annual events. They happen once a year, each one of those things. So there's the Other Art Fair, there's Summer Sounds, there's our Summer Cinema, this is the Degree Show, and then that's CogX, which is a big... you'll know what CogX is, a big tech conference. So they're all annual. But then we have a whole series of things. So we have this rhythm now. So boot camp is every day. The Canopy Market is every single weekend for 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We have this is the car boot market that happens a couple of times a year. And then this is slightly more ad hoc, where we have basically picture shows and things that are happening in the public space. When we ask people, why do you come to King's Cross? The best answer is, I just like to hang out here. So if we go back to what our objective was we just want people to come and have a reason to come. It's these guys who are coming here, and actually they're not doing anything in particular apart from just enjoying being there. And that's kind of, for us, is quite a big measure of success, that we've managed to get to the situation where people are comfortable with that. And I now have the pleasure of, I'm doing it all over again. So we're just starting again. We're right back at the beginning with a new development. It's even bigger than King's Cross. We've built a timber pavilion for visitors. We've got our first Meanwhile Cafe open. We've also got a roastery. We've got a baker's. We've got other things. This is a temporary park. We're taking local buildings and we're putting art and culture on them. And it's just really great to be back at that first moment where there's a buzz as you start to see really, really significant change through actually relatively small interventions. So that's the little story of King's Cross. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next speaker and guest is Carl Turner, founding director at Turner Works. Carl is founding director of architecture and urban design studio Turner Works and co-founder of social enterprises Pop Brixton, Peckham Levels and Makeshift. One of Carl's formative projects was his very own slip house in Brixton, which went on to win the prestigious RIBA Manser Medal for House of the Year. And TarnaWorks has developed a unique way of working that has become known as Meanwhile. And the studio has evolved this idea of agile thinking to the scale of the city to challenge conventional master planning. So please, Karl, stage is yours.
Thank you. That's quite a big act to follow, King's Cross. So yeah, sorry, my name will be up there for quite a while, but it'll get moving. So yeah, I'm an architect, but I actually dropped the word architect because I felt it really held back what we wanted to do as a practice and a group of people. So as the practice has evolved, we're much more involved now in kind of urban strategies and thinking. And meanwhile, ideas were kind of critical to that. So I'm going to show you 4 projects, 4 case studies. One of them is Peckham Levels that you've seen already, and really think about what we learned from those projects. There were projects that we kind of fell into. We didn't plan it that way. It was kind of really ad hoc. But yeah, we've learned lots. So this is the first one, Pop Brixton. My wife's from Brixton, so I'd lived here for many years. And the local council, I saw it in the local paper actually, they had this piece of land and they were looking for fools or people to come along with ideas for the site. So yeah, I went along and said I had an idea to make a space for all the people of Brixton. They were really interested in testing the idea of what kind of spaces people might need. They wanted to know what affordable meant. They wanted to know whether people wanted space to work in Brixton, because it's a kind of neighbourhood in London. So anyway, the idea, as you just saw, was to build it from shipping containers. So we went through a competition process. We won a competition. I should have said I'm a kind of a builder as well. So as well as designing the site, after winning the competition, we actually built it, which means we organised proper builders, but we kind of organised the whole thing. I sold my house to invest some money in it to get it off the ground, and then that brought in some other investors who put most of the money in. And it's been running for about 6 years now. So I also wrote the business model. It was completely wrong. The idea was right, but obviously I got the numbers all wrong. But actually the model works really well, and it's a revenue-based model, so we don't own the site. The site's leased from the council who own it, so it's public land. They've got it for, we've leased it for 6 years. And then after building it, we set up an operations company and employed gradually maybe about 10 people to help run it. So this was something that I didn't really have any experience of. I knew what I thought was wrong with development, and I felt that I could really come forward with some new ideas. So really it's a mix. We use shipping containers. It's a mix of workspaces, food, drink, events, many of the things that Nick's talked about. And the team there, we put on a creative series of events. So after Peckham Levels, after Pop Brixton, I think what happens is developers and local authorities see projects and then they think, we've got a problem or a building or a site, maybe something similar. So that council just down the road had this empty car park in Peckham. And as Petra said, for about 10 years, Bold Tendencies and Frank's Campari Bar had operated on the roof of the building, but the rest of the building was like this. So again, it was derelict, there was drug problems, antisocial behaviour. Nobody parked there because it was too scary. So this cool stuff had been going on the roof for years, but it only really went on in July, August and September, and the rest of the building was completely empty. So it was called locally the empty levels of the car park. So we called the project Peckham Levels. And really what we did was we brought the same ingredients that we tested in Pop Brixton and that had been running for about 2 years by this point. We brought them to the car park. So Pop Brixton's about 20,000 square feet, and this building's about 80,000, so it was significantly bigger. And we needed a bit more money, so about £3 million. But that spread over such a big building, it's incredibly small amount of money. So again, we're able to team up with the council who own the building. It was a 7-year lease initially. We raised $3 million to do the work. So these kind of projects, they take about 2 years. I think both of these projects took about 2 years from the first time we met the people on the site, and then we had to get planning, building regs, because it's a full building commitment. And then actually to build it and get it open and running. So I think Pop Brixton has about 200 people that work there every day. This project has got about 600 people working here. So at its core DNA, it's 50 studios. So we use the car parking base as to delineate where the studios went. The studios run around the perimeter, obviously where the light's better, and then all the facilities are in the middle. One of the things that works really well is the building's kind of split level, so all the ramps have been retained, and it still feels like a car park inside. I love this guy. He's a violin maker and repairer, so he talks about his medieval trade that he carries out in this kind of 20th century building. So really, these projects are all about, you know, as an architect, we're doing the absolute minimum that we need to do. We're just getting the building sort of up and running, safe, and then we're handing it over to a whole bunch of members who then take control of their own spaces. So all of these spaces have been designed by the individual businesses. And then it's really about creating a platform for all these people. And it's what they do there, you know, what they make of things. So we've got co-working space, which is desk space, food, drink, events, yoga. So you can't plan all this stuff. So our whole engagement process of meeting people, saying, look, this is the building, these are the types of space we've got. What we found is that lots of great ideas come forward. So the yoga studio guys came forward at engagement. So we were like, yeah, great. It's got quite low ceilings, but it can probably work. But I love these images. This is the DNA of the project, which is just a whole series of individual studios. And there's just so many different things that go on in the building. I think of it as a beehive of activity, all this creativity. There's 600 people every day. And the visitor numbers are amazing. Pop Brixton's getting about 1 million visitors a year, which is quite incredible for such a small site. And I should also say these projects, the space is provided for local people. So if you're local, you get preference for space. So yeah, those two projects, one was a shipping container project, one was a multi-story car park. We were then approached about this site on the edge of the Olympic Park. So there's a legacy plan for the Olympic site. Lots of housing and other things have been built there, but one of the legacy plans was to provide meanwhile space. So this was the site. It was there's a huge Victorian water main running under here. That's the kind of power station for the site, energy generation. And then we had this split level site. It was a coach park during the Olympics. So again, we brought a similar series of ingredients with us. This time there was nothing there. So and I think we'd learned our lesson really building with shipping containers. It's quite tricky to use the containers to create larger spaces. So actually we had the idea of using barns, but because it's on the Olympic site, the Olympic Authority didn't want it to be so rough and ready. They wanted it to be a bit more polished, a bit more architectural. So effectively we created 5 bespoke barns, but we've created them in a way they're bolted together. So there's a 12-year lease on this site, and the idea is that after 12 years, I mean, it'll probably last a bit longer than 12 years, but the buildings can be disassembled, so it's built for disassembly, so it's pretty much dry fixed. It's got super thin foundations. It's 5 buildings, 3 of them are interconnected. The architecture is really simple. It's kind of harking back to the industrial heritage of the area. This used to be a big sweet factory on this site. And then it's really the activation, the people, the events, the artwork, all of the stuff that comes to the site that really adds the color and the life. These little spaces that connect some of the buildings are really successful, just these kind of outdoor covered areas. They cost a bit of money, and when you're looking through trying to figure out how you can save every penny, sometimes these things that seem a bit crazy are actually the most successful bits. But also working with artists, putting murals on brand new buildings. It was bringing a sense of some of the chaos from Hackney Wick, just across the canal, a sort of renowned artist area. So many of the artists who were losing space in Hackney Wick then took space here. So again, it's food, drink, events, co-working. This has got some heavier maker space, and then it's got studios as well. So it's a really creative mix. And most of the tenants tend to stay here maybe in these projects for about a year. And we definitely encourage people to move through the site. So the idea is that people will actually move on. This is the 4th project. So this is actually not in London. It's if you've been on the Eurostar to London, you'll have gone through Ashford International. So this is Ashford in Kent. So it's about 30 miles from London. And these are the buildings that we found. So it was a series of derelict railway buildings, not as big as King's Cross, but some old railway sites. And the council, again, they'd seen Pop Brixton, they'd seen Peckham Level, so they ran a competition. This time it was an architectural competition. So we won the competition. it's great when the competitions are based on your projects that you've delivered, because then obviously you're in the right field. So this is one of our kind of sketchy competition drawings, workspace, this kind of event yard, and then the other building we were going to strip back, put polycarbonate on. We're calling it a hot house. So the idea of a big kind of event space. So after we won the competition, we took it through planning. The council turned to the thorny question of who was going to build it. So eventually, after a lot of arm twisting, we agreed to build it. So we set up a little local construction company and delivered it as a design and build project, and then more arm twisting about who was going to run it. So we set up an operations company to run it. So I'm not running the other 3 projects anymore, thankfully, because they're quite big and quite complex, but we have actually been running this project for nearly 3 years now. So this is the hot house. You can see we stripped off all of the asbestos, cleaned up the steelwork. We used signal yellow kind of as a reminder of the railway heritage. And then we've got this big kind of really, luminous shed. Here it was set up as a vegan food market, as a bar on the mezzanine. And we've been running this for nearly 3 years. And it's a lot tougher than running a project like this than it is in central London. The market's a lot tougher. Nothing like this existed in Ashford or really in Kent. So we're really bringing new ideas. People like to get dressed up, and this is the kind of place where you go scruffy. You probably have to have a coat because it's cold, so you can't get dressed up and go out in your finest. So we're kind of bringing people to a new way of doing things. And then the other buildings, we just did the absolute minimum to get them operational. A bit of co-working and studios. So the studios have been really successful. They're all fully let, and we've gradually converted some more of the co-working space, which hasn't really worked so well. But the studios are super popular. So I think Peckham Levels, we've got 50 studios, and we've got 200 people on the waiting list still. So while we've been doing these projects, we've been looking at huge sites. This was Silvertown in the Docklands, hundreds of containers. This almost actually happened, and it just came down to a negotiation over a lease didn't work. And then I was just talking to Nick about a big 33-story building in the centre of London that we were approached by a global tech company to look at how they could use the building for 5 years temporarily. So again, we were going to bring 2,000 people into the building, the idea of a vertical neighbourhood with floors of street food, a climbing wall, all the kind of stuff that we've done in other buildings, really trying to create a sort of a neighborhood, just giving it away now. So I think for us, the really exciting thing is that we're moving beyond individual buildings or small sites and really thinking like how we can make sense of all of this. Like I said, none of that was really planned. We kind of stumbled through it, kind of doing things by trial and error. And I think one of the things that we've begun to do now is we've been asked to look at whole places. So this is Weston-super-Mare. It's a seaside place. Struggling. It's a really lovely place, but it had a sort of personality image. And actually the people that live there were really down on the place. So we were asked to come in and put a vision together for the town, which was basically a document, a 100-page document. And we developed the idea of the micro plan. So the idea of a plan of many small interventions as a way of really illustrating actually how easy it might be to make a change. These are not real interventions, it's just an idea about how you could use kind of color graphics and temporary planting. They've got a rooftop car park, it'd be great for a cinema on the roof, markets, it's got great views, murals, all sorts of things. So the idea of pulling lots and lots of small things together into a plan. So thinking strategically about a town. So while we were doing this, we also built a website. We were doing kind of fly posting around the town. We were doing lots of talking to people. We're making films. We're working with poets. So yeah, I think a lot of these things seem like they're sort of inconsequential, and people say, oh, it's a waste of money. We shouldn't be spending money on this. We should be building housing. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. But so we talk about a toolkit of things, and we try and get people really excited about things. So yeah, we've also been working in New Haven with the council, identifying lots of their empty buildings, and again, thinking about a plan for the town centre. It's another seaside place. So lots of small seaside towns in the UK are really struggling. They've got a kind of identity crisis. They're thought of being a bit low budget. So we've also been designing exhibitions. This one was in Bristol. So this was another vision project that we got involved with, where actually the council had a master plan that had gone a bit awry, and they'd had to withdraw it and walk away from it. And then we were asked to step in and actually go back and start talking to people again and try to row back some of the harm that had been done and to try and get some trust back. This is Thamesmead. So this is a town centre built in the 60s and 70s that we've been working in. So this is one of the engagement projects that we did in Weston-super-Mare. So we called it Western Wishes. So if you think about, you send your best wishes postcards. So we sent 5,000 postcards out and we got 5,000 back, more or less. And I think the great thing about this sort of tactic is we're asking people to be really positive. We're not saying, tell us what's wrong with the place. We're saying, what do you want? What's good about it? We're trying to get people to think positively. So that was in Bristol. So we're meeting young people. We're doing walking tours. And then we're applying now these ideas. This is in Bergen in Norway. So I'm one of a group of practices called London On. We recently won a competition to revamp the harbour area in Bergen. And again, we're bringing now the meanwhile agile ideas to a bigger scale. So again, it's not the kind of things that you'd see architects or urban designers doing. So this is a video to do with the Bristol project. And this is Caleb Parkin, who's Bristol's poet. So we commissioned him to write a poem after he talked to lots of people about this area of Bristol that is going to have 2,000 homes built on it. We commissioned filmmakers, and we were really looking to tell the story of the place, to find out actually what's really powerful about what's there. All of the kind of areas that people like to go and, do all sorts of things. So how can you develop an area without losing that kind of stuff? So anyway, I'm just wrapping up now. So I guess one of our tactics we talk about is the pull effect. So this is the way that we're just talking about guerrilla tactics, really. So populate is just the idea that you do something. So actually, you just do something. You don't overthink it. You accept it's an experiment. It's a trial. What that does is unlocks things. So it cuts through red tape. It actually unlocks funding. It gets things moving really quickly. As you move through a process, maybe that's 2 or 3 years. While you're doing that, you're learning what works, what doesn't work. And then the idea is eventually you plug that into the legacy for the site. So all of these projects, as everybody said, they're not intended to be there forever. They're intended to actually facilitate a change in an area, maybe to take a building that was empty. And I think the opposite of this is what I talk about is the push effect. So what we're trying to do is really think about the way that a lot of development has the opposite effect. So our technique is to try and literally pull people into the project. So focusing on local people, how can we get everybody engaged in it? And Nick's talked about that as well. And so much development actually pushes out people. It pushes up prices. It causes stagnation because sites are not actually worked on for years. It can undermine the local economy and it hikes up costs. So what we're talking about is really conventional master planning, which we need. So if a city sets a target for an area of 2,000 homes in an area, what we're saying is the master plan can deal with some of those big number things, but the micro plan can start from day one and the two can work together. So the micro plan team actually get things moving really quickly. They can pull people in. And I think Nick's actually shown that exact tactic really of working really hard on the ground, getting things moving. So that's me. That's what I know about Meanwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Karl. And now it's time for Šimon Iráček, my dear colleague from IPR. Šimon is an architect. It's my colleague from Office of Public Space. And he leads several projects from streets and squares redesigns to conceptual studies of whole neighborhoods. His latest realization is Smetanovo nábřeží, which is waterfront close to National Theatre. Šimon, please join me.
Wow, I'm really impressed. I see that we still have a lot to learn about. I'm looking forward for the book where you mention everything in 10 steps. I'm gonna talk, or your team, I'm gonna talk shortly about 2 projects that we've been in IPR working in past 2-3 years. They have several things in common. They are both in a city center of Prague. They are close to each other, and they had the strong support from the local authorities in the long-term proposal, as well as in the immediate change of the temporary use of the public space. The first one is Mariánské náměstí, the square. Maybe you know it. It's surrounded by a municipal library, the National Library, and also the City Hall. It's like very important place, I think, and we might say that there always been a strong correlation in between the way the city has been governed and the use of the square. It's been a parking lot ever since, and it changed in 2019. Just within one day, it turns in what you see on a screen. It was really a quick change. We just put few signs so that cars cannot park there. We put few seats, a table in the middle, and people started going there. People started spending some time there. And we, meanwhile, we collaborated with Czech Technical University, and we tried to monitor the space and the way how the place is pedestrianized, how people are walking there. And, well, what's the difference? That people started spending their time and people starting meeting there. It turns immediate into place where people started to meet each other, and that's when our participation process began. We started asking what they like, what they are missing, and we use all these information for the proposal process. That has been followed by the new collaboration with City Library. They arranged kind of board, and they started organizing events on a weekly basis. And all what happened, it helped us when the proposal of the square has been released. It's been immediately accepted without hesitation from the public, as well as from the City Hall that's financing all the reconstruction. If we'll be lucky, the next year the reconstruction should begin. And now we move to the riverside, to Smetanovo nábřeží, to the embankment. That's been like. There's been always a huge traffic jam ever since, and it's even nowadays. But it wasn't founded like that. In the mid-19th century, it's been founded as a place that should be pedestrianized. It should be like a terrace from which you can actually see to the Prague Castle. And we really want to bring this idea back to life. And so we analyze how the whole embankment is being used, what are the problems, and we found out that it's like the most polluted place in Prague in the afternoon due to the huge traffic and also due to the narrow streets. We also found out that the place is being overheated in the afternoon. That's the temperature of the surfaces you see on the screen. And so the idea of bringing the trees in the proposal came. But before that, we actually closed a part of the embankment, and we started using it for people who want to stay there. We gave the opportunity for the guys who run the coffees around, so then they can move their business outside. And well, people start going there. Few years ago, during the European Mobility Week, it also has been closed for the traffic for a weekend. And well, that's, I think, the very beginning of the idea. And now we are in this situation when 1/3 of the embankment has been reconstructed. There is no change for the traffic yet, but we still have a lot of works in front of us, and hopefully we will reach also the following parts. It's just the beginning for us, it's just the beginning for Prague, and hopefully there will be this snowball effect and more projects will come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentations, and now I will ask speakers to join me here for a short discussion. Thank you, my colleagues, for helping me with chairs. I won't help them because iPad is heavier than it looks, and it's their job. Thank you guys, thank you very much. You are the best. You are the best. So please. Thank you. Also, thank you for your questions. I would like to start with a question for each of you. There is a question: what a city should gain from these meanwhile projects? But I would like to ask you, what, from point of your profession's view, what is the advantage of these projects? As an architect, as a developer, what gives you when you create a project like this?
Sorry, the question is what's the
what
benefit?
These projects gives you? Because as you're a developer, what is the biggest advantage for you? Because you can build a building and you don't have to care what's going on there.
So for us, the answer for me is in the context of being a long-term developer, okay? So if I create long-term financial value by creating long-term social value, those two things are intrinsically linked, okay? We're not a charity. We're not here just to do things. It is my job to make profits for my shareholders, okay? But I know, because we're in it for the long term, if I can fundamentally shift and create the kind of places where people are going to want to spend their time, then businesses are going to want to position themselves there. Great restaurateurs and retailers are going to want to be part of it, and people are going to want to live there. And so that becomes, for me, a virtuous circle, but it requires us to invest up front, invest financially, because it does cost money, but also invest in terms of our time and our commitment to being involved in activities and creating partnerships, which frankly many people in my profession don't really want to do.
There is a question that some people call it activation and some people call it marketing. And do you see where's the difference between marketing and where it's starting to become activation and finding a value of the place? Do you see where's the difference between these two words?
It's really, really clear to me. If the people who turn up feel that what you are doing is a benefit to them, and they feel that it's an authentic part of that place, people don't feel like they're being sold to. If you are marketing through this, people will know it instantly. We all know when somebody's trying to sell us something, okay? And people will know when you're trying to sell them something. So don't try and do that. Try and authentically create a place where they, their families, and their friends will actually want to come and spend time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Karel, what this project gives you as an architect? Is it a challenge, or is it something like, is it more playful, more creative?
I think it can be really frustrating in the design profession. If you're designing big buildings, they can take many years and they have many hands, and it can be quite stifling overall. So the meanwhile way of doing things from a design point of view is really rewarding because it happens really quickly. It's quite collaborative, it's quite fun, it's experimental, and I think hopefully you got the idea that the benefit of it is that it's, you know, in terms of testing ideas, it cuts through red tape. It actually makes everybody relax. Planning's quite difficult in the UK. Anything you try and get planning for is a battle usually, of scale, but you know, things like Pop Brixton is a major application. It's quite actually a big thing in the middle of the town. Lots of noisy music, crowds, events, lots of things like that. But actually, we just sailed through planning because people were like, oh, well, it's only temporary, so don't get over worried about it because it's only there for a few years. And so it just makes everybody relax. It makes the authorities relax. And I think it helps to get things moving. But, you know, I think what we've been doing in also with the kind of marketing thing, branding, is almost like in Weston-super-Mare, for instance, you know, it's a play on words, but we rebranded the town, or we tried to sell it back as Super Western, and it was about putting a positive spin on the place, saying it's actually a really, really nice place. It's got the sea, it's got a beach, you've got lovely Victorian buildings, beautiful houses. Okay, so it needs a bit of a lift, but actually the DNA of the place is amazing, and actually, you know, now there's, you know, that's 3 or 4 years ago, they're still using the hashtag Super Western, and it's created a whole, it's really lifted people's morale, and actually people are really proud of the town now, and we haven't actually done anything physically, it's just we've created a sort of sense of ownership, and you know, social media has become quite an important tool for us working in that way.
Thank you. Shimon, you represent City in this discussion. What's your opinion about this question?
Well, at the very beginning of each project, it's really hard to find out what people actually want. And by saying people, I don't mean just the citizens, but everyone in the local authorities and the city companies. And the result should match with that. So you have to find a compromise, because there is nothing like perfect match. And if you succeed, you can actually reach the reconstruction process. And it's happening, not very common here in Prague, but sometimes it happens. And like we having few results, or we've seen them in my presentation.
At the beginning, I mentioned that these projects get us closer to people, that we see how they use places. Is there something that you learned from these projects? We have seen the heat map, we have seen that you have experience with participating with people. Is there something that changed your point of view, that you learned something from people?
Yeah, well, you can always think something about particular place, but you don't see everything. Like you don't think in a way the other people do. So it's really about finding out what other people think, so you can put all these ideas together and understand actually the site.
And Petra, finally, you have seen all of these projects. You've seen a wide range of projects and realizations, and you talk to many authors and developers. Do you agree with these opinions? Do you think that this is what is it about?
So I think I'm going to answer the question with my placemaking hat on, because placemaking and strategies for public space for very large scale, but also small scale projects is something that I've been involved mostly. And in that process, for me, it is most important about creating a space where the relationship between the people and the place can start to emerge. And in order to have a relationship to the place, you have to have a sense of ownership, mental ownership, and therefore also responsibility. So I think that the meanwhile activation or temporary projects are really powerful in that respect, that they actually give people the space that they can engage with directly. And I mean, even, you know, if you think about that initiative in Vienna that I was talking about, which the residents can actually change their street. And that's a very simple thing, but it's really difficult to do it. If you were to do it in Prague tomorrow, you'd probably get a fine if you took up the space, which was a parking space. So if there isn't, I mean, it's kind of like, if you think about those very small changes, they're actually really difficult to make. But if you set the rules or a strategy, or if you open up those opportunities, then actually people will flock to it, and then people will take ownership of that space, and they will take care of it. And therefore, I mean, it's what Martin was talking about, which is, you know, if you feel good in a space, then you also are behaving in a good way towards the space, so you're kind to it. And I think that's that is an important aspect in all of those projects, that sense of mental ownership.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Yes, there. Welcome to camp.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for great presentations. My question is, how activating of these forgotten and unused places have affected or affect the traffic? Because more people in some place mean also more mobility and traffic pressures. So were there also incorporated some measures that helped manage it, like adding some temporary parking lots, bus stops, or increasing the intensity of public transport, or maybe it wasn't a problem at all? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So maybe King's Cross is a good example. How well this place is connected to public transport. I guess it's very good. So
part of the answer is you choose where you do this. Because ideally you want to do this in a place that is well connected to public transport. King's Cross is probably the best connected public transport node in the whole of London, if not the whole of southern England, I should think. So it has a huge advantage. King's Cross is essentially a car-free place. There is access by car to certain areas, but a lot of it is car-free. So I would say actually think about where you're doing it. If you are doing this and it is actually generating a traffic problem as a consequence, you're probably doing it either in the wrong place or in the wrong way.
This question gets us to the early stages of the project. What is the most important thing when you start with the project? In the early stages, when you start in communication, when you're starting a projection, what's the most important thing where you can make a mistake? Is it this thing that you have to think about transportation and about externalities?
Unfortunately, I go back to the answer to the first question, actually. The biggest mistake you can make is to actually use it and sell with it and be overtly marketing with it. That's the biggest error that you can make. Apart from that, I mean, in a way, you can't go wrong in the sense that it's okay to fail. I think what you do need to do, and I put up a picture early in my presentation there of a document called Principles for a Human City. And that was a book that we wrote in 2001, and it set out 10 shared ambitions between ourselves, the local council, and English Heritage, who look after heritage assets in the UK. And it was really carefully thought through what those things were. And embedded within those principles for development were certain values about what the place was all about. And, the human city was the first one. And another one that was relevant to this is that one of the principles was good for King's Cross, good for London. In other words, don't think about this just in the terms of where you're doing it. Think about it in the wider context of the big place that you're doing. And the reason I say this is because if you set out at the beginning what your principles are, what your values are, then all the decisions you then make about what you do, who you partner with, are governed and guided by those principles. If you just kind of turn up and start doing stuff, you can do stuff that actually doesn't really necessarily support where you ultimately want to get to. And you may end up putting off some of the partners and customers that you want to attract by things that you did in the first instance.
Thank you. Karl, have you had any discussion with the client in this, they were like, okay, we want thousands of people here. This is empty parking lot or empty factory, and we want thousands of people there. And you had to say them, okay, it's not possible. There is not even a bus stop. Have you had to change their mind in this way?
Yeah, well, I mean, Ashford is a good example of a car-dependent town where everybody drives everywhere, and we didn't have any parking. So that was a big issue. But I think I agree with Nick, and I always talk about figuring out why you want to do something. So in Ashford, the council wanted to change the perception of the town. It had a really, local people call it Trashford. It's got a kind of down at heel kind of vibe again, a kind of self-flagellation of people that live in places that hate the places they live. So they wanted to begin to change the nature. They knew that a lot of the young people would jump on the fast train straight to King's Cross, and they'd go and hang out in King's Cross, and they wanted to keep going to Nick's amazing new place. They wanted to try and keep the young people in Ashford more. So there was nothing for young people to do. There's no incubator space for small businesses, and there's just nothing cultural, really much going on in the town centre. So they wanted to bring some of those things to Ashford, partly to stop the brain drain and the kind of people going into town for entertainment, but also to change the nature. And one of the problems we had to overcome was when we tried to let the spaces, people initially wouldn't rent the space because it didn't have parking. And we just had to work really hard to talk to people about sustainability. It's next to a train station. What, do you live in Ashford? Yes. Why do you need to drive here? It's only a small town. Can't you walk? What if it's raining? Use an umbrella. Yeah, and it's just for generally trying to get people out of their cars because it's so easy to drive everywhere. And then so people started cycling. So we don't have any parking. We never have had. The site is fully tenanted now, but it was a real thing that we had to do. Initially, people would just flatly not take space because it didn't have parking, but we got over it eventually once they saw how good it was. And also, I guess one of the other things is that we've found with Meanwhile is people probably think that it's going to make money, but generally it doesn't. It's not really about money. It's more about other things. So that's usually a conversation that it's probably going to cost money rather than make money, but there's other benefits to it.
Thank you. Shimon, when you have a project like Smetana Nábřeží, when you are, I don't want to say against cars, but pro trams and pedestrians, what is, and you bring this project to City Hall, what is the first question? Did they ask about the cars, or did they ask about what will people say, or what's their first reaction?
Well, the problem with traffic in Prague is much bigger. Currently, we're having like 0.7 cars per person, which is twice more than they have in Vienna or in Berlin. So basically, everyone in Prague owns cars. So if you do anything against the traffic, the cars, people start to shout.
Yeah, but not everyone using Smetanovo Nábřeží for daily commute.
Well, what we've done in the Smetanovo Nábřeží, that we, when we see the whole project, what we intend to do, we pick like small spots that doesn't strongly affect any traffic changes, and that's where we started. So we picked those places, we reconstruct them, so people actually started liking that, and then we try to persuade, we try to explain that this change can be very positive without any negative influences, anything that negatively affects cars, and hopefully we will follow, we'll see.
Is it true that if you take some parking lots off the street and people are against it, after a few weeks they realize that they don't want them back?
Depends. I think that there are still several people who doesn't see the positive on it. So, but yeah, mostly they do.
Okay. Is there another question? Anyone? Yes? Great. Welcome to camp.
More about the obstacles that you faced with the projects, because it kind of seems like quite easy and nice, and amazing and inspiring. But I wondered also, what kind of strategies you use to get over those obstacles. That would be great.
Yeah, maybe it's a good question for Petra. Which obstacles you want to mention as the most interesting or most important in meaning of a book? What we find in a book as a biggest obstacle to be careful?
I mean, I think one of the biggest issues is about communication, again, coming back to the first point at the beginning. And it's about sometimes clients or investors and even teams have great ideas, and they sort of fail to communicate, or they communicate too late, and this sense of building trust is really important to sort of get that right at the beginning, because it's really hard to rebuild that. And I think when we look particularly at sort of Central and Eastern European region, I think that we have to say here in this context also to what Shimon was saying, that it is a slightly different where we are because of the legacy of communism and the change which had happened then in 1989, and the fact that actually we are still quite young democracies, which means that there's been a long wave of sort of people really flocking towards private ownership and really wanting to have the house with the fence around and the car, and what was in between the sort of everyone's space became nobody's space. And this is a legacy that we're actually on the way to reshape and change and transform, and we can see how actually difficult that is, and perhaps in some other cities they are further ahead. So when you look at what's happening in Barcelona or New York, and then people always say like, oh yes, but in New York they have a lot more money, and they throw money at it. But actually, if you read Janet Sadikan's book Street Fight, you will find out that actually the exact same problems and like small battles that you have to have on a daily basis in every street and borough about making a cycle path, and then there's so many people against it, and so people are the same everywhere. And I think sometimes in the context of Central and Eastern Europe, we think that, actually it's different here and you can't do things that way here. And I think it is time for us to start thinking like, actually, we have the same possibilities and the same means to make these changes, and we have to be much more bold to try to make those changes. So for the book, we have really focused on showing those great examples also from Czech Republic, also from Vienna, from Budapest, from Bratislava, looking at Central European context, because we didn't want to come here and be like, okay, look at all these amazing things in London and New York. Yes, we have included and have a lot of sort of Western case studies, but we wanted to really show and highlight amazing things that are happening here. And I think that I've completely failed to answer your question there, but...
No, thank you very much. I agree with that, 100%. So this is last question for you, gentlemen. Do you agree? Is the communication the biggest challenge, or would you like to pick another one, Shimon? Challenge or obstacle?
Yeah, I'm thinking, to be honest, in Prague, I see the main problem that we are missing one single person who would be in charge of deciding whether we're supposed to do nothing or not. It means that quite often it happens that we have projects where we couldn't find how to follow. Like, for example, nearby the public spaces I show you, there is another space, Palachovo náměstí. There was architecture competition in 2002. Nothing happened since, and people are still working on it. But that's what I see as the main obstacle. We really, or I think it would be the best if we have just one single person who would be in charge of choosing what he wants to do.
Thank you. Nick, what's the
I'll talk about this rather than talking about it in the context of King's Cross, because I think it's a bit of a unique situation when you own all that land. I think the two things that are really the biggest barriers to these kinds of things, one is money, because it generally costs money, and two is just inertia. It is public councils and the public, the communities, unwillingness to change. And I think what was really interesting during lockdown, during the pandemic, was we saw through absolute need, certainly in the UK we saw this, we saw a lot of changes in the way that activities were taking place outside in the streets in our cities. Councils actually extended pavements to be able to put seating outside of restaurants so they could serve, so that people couldn't be inside. There were other kind of outdoor activities that were made more available to people, and they weren't difficult. They were actually difficult. So They found the money, and the inertia was removed because they had no choice. And I just think, and once you do those things, people suddenly go, oh my God, that was easy. This is actually really quite good. And suddenly it snowballs. And once you get that ball rolling, people want more of it and more, and you can really do something exciting. But it's just getting over those initial financial and inertia hurdles. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, I think for bigger meanwhile projects where there's quite a lot of capital needing to be invested, it's well, if it's a piece of land that might be developed in the future, there's worry that if the meanwhile project is really successful, then people will not want it to be taken away, and that might block development. So we've had that happen on a few sites where just the chance of that happening has been enough to stop the landowner from letting something happen, and the land is still sat there empty years later. And then, yeah, just around raising the finance, it's not going to work. If you're going to spend a few million on a project, it's not going to work for a year. So there's probably a minimum. So like in central London, we're thinking that meanwhile projects need to be at least 5 years if you've invested a fair bit of money, just so that you can try. It's not about making money, but just to try and break even. So the projects that we've run have been around not trying to make a profit, but also not trying to lose money. So we're trying to do good. So we're taking the money from the food, the drink, the events, and we're supporting affordable, creative space for local people. That's the idea of the model. So there's money behind it, and all of the good stuff seems really easy, but there's kind of hard cash that somebody's put on the line, and that means a certain amount of time. So COVID was really tough for meanwhile projects, the big projects, because the tenants didn't want to pay rent, and a lot of them moved out. So that was really difficult. Suddenly there was no income, but all the bills still had to be paid. So and the length of the lease is the same. So there's less money to earn that money. So there's inherent problems in the model. It's not easy, but it's really worth it because it really does pull people into the picture, I think.
Thank you very much. As baby architect decided, enough talking. So I will ask you for applause for our speakers. And as we mentioned, we are here to launch a book. So I will ask Petra and her team to tell us more about the book and take a photo with it and tell you something about the book and tell you something why we are here.
Thank you. I think we all talked enough, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to our team, and I would like to ask and invite you to come over here. Radim, Kika, Oliver, Katarina, Zuzana, Macio, and I would like to say thank you to Martin, who has actually come up with the idea in the first place to give me this opportunity to work on an amazing project, and the reason we're all here tonight, and for me to be able to invite people and to have this great discussion. So thank you to our speakers, and thank you to also our sounding board, and Milota Sidrova, who is in the audience, one of our sounding boards, and the others are abroad, unfortunately, but Gaba Bindic, who couldn't be here tonight, and everyone who had contributed to make this happen. So well done to us all. Thanks.
Well done.
So while we were taking pictures, I would like to mention that you are invited for a drink and for talk. So I've seen that there are more questions. So feel free to ask the team and our guests more questions about the project you have seen. We'll be really happy if you spend some time with us. We are opened longer than usually, so no closing at 9. And feel free to enjoy camp.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Petra, maybe I will ask you how we can get a book, because we can buy it here and we can also download it.
So there's a website called meanwhile.city where you can find out more, and you can get a digital copy or you can request a copy. There's also some copies here for people if they wanted to have a look or if they wanted to buy one. And there's going to be, the book is going to be in the camp bookshop from today onwards, if you didn't want to buy it today. And yeah, meanwhile.city is where you get all the important information. And there's drinks, which is the most important now, so we invite everyone to enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks.